Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and a mystery too dark for Poirot, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Letter He Shouldn't Have Read. A cryptic message arrives, and Poirot hesitates. The candle sputtered once, then went out. In the silence, the only sound was the rustling of paper, slow and deliberate, like the hiss of a match, just before it catches. Hercule Poirot did not speak. He did not move. His fingers rested lightly on the letter that had been slid under his door, the envelope torn with care but now lying forgotten on the polished oak desk of his London flat. His eyes narrowed. The ink was smudged, as though written in haste. The scent of rosewater lingered faintly from the page, clashing sharply with the deep musk of old tobacco Poirot had detected earlier that evening near his entryway. There were only 6 lines on the letter, 6 lines and a signature that should not have existed. And yet, here it was. Monsieur Poirot, there is a murder, not yet committed. You must not interfere. If you do, it will be your last case. Some secrets should remain buried. A C. Poirot stared at the signature. A C. He had seen those initials before, in a different place, a different time. But that was impossible, and yet the blood in his veins had gone cold. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his voice a whisper so low it vanished into the tick of the mantel clock. Could it be her? He reached for the envelope again. No postage stamp. Hand-delivered. The handwriting was precise, elegant, but oddly slanted in the final flourish. The C curved not with flair, but hesitation. Someone masking a familiar hand. Poirot rose from his chair and stepped to the window. Below, the London street lay empty, slick with rain. A street lamp flickered. A figure might have passed minutes ago, unnoticed. Yet Poirot felt it still, the sensation that he was being watched. Not just observed, but studied. And that the letter had not merely been delivered, it had been performed. He turned away and smoothed his moustache, but the unease in his chest remained. Ah, but why now? After all these years, why her? Unless it was not her at all. Unless the letter was bait. A trap, cleverly set. Poirot's eyes turned toward the fire, where the flame danced quietly in the grate. The room, though warm, felt chill. The knock came precisely 5 minutes later. Not frantic, not timid, but 3 sharp taps, spaced with almost mathematical regularity. Poirot answered it himself. Standing in the doorway was Chief Inspector Harold Simmons of Scotland Yard, soaked to the bone and holding his hat like a man who had run out of excuses. "There's been an incident, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice hoarse. "Up in Kent, a manor house, Windermere Hollow, Lord Adrian Cavendish, dead." Poirot tilted his head. "And why, mon ami, do you come to me? Surely Lord Cavendish was not murdered in my flat." "No," Simmons muttered. "But this was found at the scene, on the drawing-room table, addressed to you." He handed over a second envelope, cream paper, red wax seal, no writing. Poirot broke it open. Another letter. One secret has been silenced. 2 remain, and this time, not even the great detective will see the blade before it strikes. No signature. Poirot did not move. His breath was barely audible. Then he folded the letter slowly, as one might fold a flag at a funeral. "I will come," he said. And so, by sunrise, Hercule Poirot arrived at Windermere Hollow. Set high upon the cliffs of Dover, the manor jutted out like a shipwreck clinging to stone. Its black slate roof was slick with morning frost, and gulls wheeled in the air above it like vultures impatient for certainty. Inside, the corridors whispered. The staff moved with the silence of guilt. Poirot was met by the housekeeper, Mrs. Linton, a tall, tight-lipped widow with eyes like dull steel. She led him into the library, where Lord Cavendish had been found. Poirot surveyed the room. A decanter on the sideboard. 2 glasses, one barely touched, the other shattered by the hearth. A velvet curtain half drawn, one tie-back dangling. A fire, long since gone out. Lord Adrian Cavendish lay slumped over the writing desk, one hand still holding a pen. The ink had trailed off mid-word. Poirot moved closer. The page beneath Cavendish's hand was blank. The ink had not been used. "Where are the others?" Poirot asked. "Still in the house," said Mrs. Linton. "Inspector Simmons thought it best they not leave." "Très bon," Poirot said, softly. "Then let us meet them." There were 3. Lady Helena Cavendish, the late lord's much younger wife, pale as bone china and twice as fragile, who looked at Poirot with tearless eyes and said, "He was a complicated man, Monsieur Poirot, but no one deserves this." Then there was Peter Harrow, the family solicitor, sharp suits, sharper eyes, who claimed he had been in London that night reviewing contracts, but Poirot noticed the fraying seam in his sleeve. "Not the sort of thing one wears to a city office," he murmured after Harrow left the room. And finally, Jocelyn Vale, Helena's childhood friend and a guest at the house. She said she had been asleep when the scream came. Her hands shook slightly as she poured her tea. Poirot's eyes narrowed on her locket. Inside was a picture not of Helena, as expected, but of Lord Cavendish, faded, well handled. "Curious," Poirot murmured. He retired to the study and laid out his notes. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the frost, no sound heard until the moment Helena screamed. But that could not be. The killer had not vanished into mist. No, they were still here. Poirot was certain of it. He asked to see Cavendish's papers. Mrs. Linton brought them in a lacquered box. Everything appeared orderly. Too orderly. Poirot took out a stack of letters, each marked by date, but one envelope was blank. Inside, a single sheet, torn, and scrawled in a woman's hand. "I cannot keep the secret any more. He must know. We both must. Face it. No name, no address." Poirot's breath caught. The writing matched the first letter delivered to his flat. It had not been written to Cavendish at all. It had been written to him. Poirot rose at once. "The housekeeper," he murmured. He found Mrs. Linton in the east corridor. "You worked for Lady Cavendish before she married," Poirot said, not asking, but stating. She froze. "Yes. Her family, the Vales. I was with them for 20 years. And you did not tell me this." "I didn't think it mattered." "Ah, but everything matters, madame. You see, the first letter, delivered to me, smelled of rose water, the same perfume you wore when you answered the door." That was Lady Helena's scent. But you wore it that night?" Mrs. Linton swallowed hard. "It was only to calm her. She was frightened." "Not frightened," Poirot said. "Guilty." He returned to the parlour where the three suspects were gathered. They watched him as if he carried judgment in his pocket. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began. The hour of death was between 10 and 11. The fire had gone out, but the coals were still warm. "Lady Helena, you claim to be in your room, but Mrs. Linton saw you descending the stairs at 10:15. Helena paled. "Peter Harrow," Poirot continued, "you were not in London. The train logs show no record of your return. But more than that, your shoes bear flecks of chalk dust only found near these cliffs." Harrow opened his mouth, then closed it. But the true twist... Poirot paused, letting the room hold its breath. "Is Miss Jocelyn Vale. You loved Lord Cavendish, and he, I think, once loved you." Jocelyn's lips parted. "I found your locket." Tears welled in her eyes. "But you did not kill him," Poirot said softly. "No, that honor belongs to his wife." Helena gasped. He discovered her secret, the inheritance fraud. That she was not the real Helena Vale, but a cousin, paid to impersonate her. The real Helena, dead these 10 years. Jocelyn knew, but she kept silent. Poirot stepped forward. "And Mrs. Linton, she helped her, out of guilt, out of loyalty, and perhaps out of fear." Helena's voice broke. "He was going to destroy us." Poirot looked at her. "So you destroyed him." The silence that followed was not peace. It was finality. As Helena was led away, Poirot returned to the desk where it all began. He held the first letter again. "Human nature," he murmured. "It never changes. We build our lies like houses, but truth, it finds the cracks." He turned toward the fire. The clock struck 7. This time, it did not stop. Chapter 2. A body without a name. No identity, no witnesses, just silence. The rain had not stopped for hours. It fell in unbroken sheets, turning the narrow cobbled lane into a river of black water, reflecting the dim flicker of gas lamps that sputtered against the night. The body lay there, face down in the alley, soaked to the bone, hair matted against cold stone, and blood diluted by the downpour. No wallet, no papers, no voice left to speak. Only a silent accusation, whispered by the wind. The constable vomited. Poirot arrived with his hat pulled low and his umbrella held against the storm, his moustache unaffected by the elements, as always. But even he paused, just for a moment, as the lantern was turned and the dead man's face was revealed. Not because he recognized it, but because no one did. "This man," said Inspector Cray, voice low, "has no name. No one saw anything, and there is no record of anyone matching his description in the city. Not in the last week. Not in the last month." Poirot knelt by the body, not touching it, only studying the space it had once occupied. He noted the crease in the man's trousers, creased oddly from sitting not at a desk, but on a hard bench. The fingertips were calloused, the hair slightly overgrown. The shirt cuff bore a frayed edge, not new, but recently mended. Not the signs of poverty, but of someone concealing their wealth. Above all, the skin beneath the collar was pale. Much too pale. This was not a man who had walked the city in days. A man without a name. "Mais oui," Poirot murmured, "but not without a story." The police removed the body. Poirot remained behind, still as a statue, eyes drawn, not to the alley, but the window above, half open, curtains swaying, no candle burning behind the glass. Someone had watched. He was certain of it. Back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat with a single clue. A worn silver coin, found in the man's trouser pocket, polished almost to smoothness. Not English, Belgian, outdated, and etched, faintly with a crest that had not been in use since 1909. Ah, Poirot mused aloud, a man who should not exist, carrying money that should not exist. That, mon ami, is most inconvenient for a killer. 3 days passed. No one claimed the body. The newspapers called him the ghost in the rain. The public lost interest, but not Poirot. He knew this was no random killing. This was a message. It was during a visit to the solicitor's office of Edward Bexley, an old acquaintance of the Cavendish family from the Windmere Hollow case, that a second piece clicked into place. Poirot observed a painting hung crookedly in Bexley's study, and beneath it, taped to the wall, an invitation. A masquerade ball, hosted by Lord Percival Holloway, set to take place that very weekend in Kent. Masquerade, concealed faces, secret identities, and, most intriguingly, an embossed seal on the invitation that matched the faint impression left by the Belgian coin. Poirot did not believe in coincidence. He arrived at Holloway Hall the following evening, not as a guest, but as a ghost in his own right, uninvited but unmistakable. Lord Holloway, a ruddy-faced man with fox-like eyes, met him at the entrance with forced courtesy and a stutter that betrayed more than discomfort. "You were not expected, Monsieur Poirot." "No," said Poirot, brushing imaginary lint from his cuff. "And yet I am always received." The ball unfolded in a surreal dance of shadows and silk. Masked figures laughed and flirted, wine was poured from crystal decanters, and music played from behind a silk screen. But Poirot watched the walls, not the dancers. He watched the flick of glances, the stiff postures, the subtle discomforts. He found her near the balcony, a woman in a black mask and gown of green velvet. She laughed, yes, but her fingers trembled slightly on the stem of her glass. When Poirot approached, she did not flinch, but she did not meet his gaze either. "You do not drink," he said softly, "yet your glass remains full." "I find champagne distasteful," she replied. "But it is expected, isn't it?" Poirot bowed slightly. "As are masks, but some of us never remove them, even when we are alone." She left the balcony moments later. He followed. Outside in the rose garden, she waited. "You know, don't you," she said at last, "about the man in the alley?" Poirot was silent. "He wasn't a stranger to me. He was my brother, Henri." Her name was Madeleine Holloway, the Lord's niece. Her brother had fled the country a decade ago, under the shadow of scandal, a whispered involvement in a political cover-up in Brussels. She had not heard from him since, until a letter arrived a week ago. He was coming home, but not as himself. He was coming to warn her. Poirot listened without interrupting. Then he said quietly, "And now, mademoiselle, he is dead." Madeleine nodded. "He knew something about my uncle, about the estate, something that would destroy him." Poirot said, "So he was silenced." She shook her head. "Number, you don't understand. He wasn't murdered for what he knew. He was murdered for who he had become." Inside, the party continued, but Poirot's mind worked in silence. Henri had returned, changed his name, hidden his past. The rain had washed away his prince, but not his purpose, and someone at that ball had recognized him, not as a stranger, but as a threat. There were three who stood out. Lord Holloway, of course, nervous, evasive. A man whose empire had been built on land he could not legally own, unless Henri's identity remained buried. Lady Cassandra Doring, widow of a foreign diplomat and hostess of the evening. She had once lived in Brussels, had once known a man named Henri Delacroix, and Julian Bexley, the solicitor's son. Charming. smiling too easily, who had been in London the night Henri died, or so he claimed. Poirot requested to see the guest ledger. It had been tampered with, a name added, then crossed out. H. de Luca. Not Henri's real name, but close enough. In Act 2, the curtain falls on illusion. Poirot gathered the suspects the next morning in the drawing room. Rain still lashed against the windows. "I have solved the mystery," he said calmly, "of the man who had no name." They waited. Henri Delacroix, brother to Madeleine, betrayed 10 years ago and vanished. He returned not to accuse, but to forgive. But he was not welcomed. Poirot turned to Julian. "You, Monsieur Bexley, lied. You were not in London. You were here. You recognized him." Julian's smile faltered. "That proves nothing." Poirot nodded. "Number, but the cuff-link in your coat pocket does." He drew it forth, a silver button with the Holloway crest. "Your father," Poirot continued, "was ruined by Lord Holloway's deception. Henri knew the truth, and you, in your fury, made the mistake of meeting him that night." A pause. "But you did not kill him." The shock was palpable. "No," Poirot said, "the killer was someone else entirely." He turned to Lady Cassandra, a diplomat's wife, skilled in secrets, trained in poison. "You recognized Henri because you had once used him as a pawn, and when he returned, you feared exposure." He opened a small vial. Poison, rare, Belgian, in the man's bloodstream. Her face went still. Then softly, "He begged me to tell the truth. I couldn't." "You silenced him," Poirot said, "because for people like you, reputation is everything, even if it means killing the only man who ever loved you." Lady Cassandra said nothing as she was taken away. Outside, the storm had broken. Poirot stood alone at the gate, looking out at the road. "No identity," he murmured. "No witnesses. Just silence, but even silence speaks, if you listen." He glanced at his watch. "Ah, the timing. Always the timing. It is never the murder itself that gives the killer away. It is the hour they cannot account for." And then, as the clouds cleared and the first light broke over Holloway Hall, Poirot turned and walked into the sun. Chapter 3. The Widow Who Smiled. Her alibi is perfect. Her eyes say otherwise. The wind struck the glass with the sharpness of thrown pebbles. Outside, the sea heaved like something alive, slate-grey and snarling, as if warning the house that stood perched on the edge of the Devon cliffs that it had come too close to secrets. Inside, the fire had gone out. Only the embers glowed faintly, and on the crimson rug near the hearth, a single drop of blood gleamed like a ruby under the dying light. "No, no, he was already dead when I entered the room," said Mrs. Eliza Farnham, her voice unshaken, her hair perfectly arranged. "I screamed, yes, of course, but I did not touch him. I swear it." She smiled as she said it. Not a scream smile, not the broken mask of a woman undone, but the kind of smile one might give at a charity luncheon while declining the cake. Modest, perfect, chilling. Poirot's gaze did not leave her face. His eyes moved from the careful curl of her hair to the faint shadow of eyeliner that had not smudged despite the tears she claimed to have shed. Her gloves were neatly folded in her lap, her breathing steady, yet her fingers trembled ever so slightly, only when they touched her own wrist. "A curious reaction, madame," he said softly, "to find one's husband murdered, and yet one's mascara remains unspoiled." She looked at him, the smile wavering for the first time. "Some women are composed," she said. "Oui," Poirot replied, "but not usually strategic. 3 days earlier, Edward Farnham, financier, former naval officer, and a man with a reputation for both charity and cruelty, had been found dead in his study at Greywater House, shot cleanly in the heart. No signs of struggle, no signs of entry, and most damning of all, no motive apparent. He was universally disliked, but dislike alone does not lead to murder. Not always. It was the maid, Clara, who discovered the body. She had come to deliver tea, and when no answer came to her knock, she entered to find her master slumped in the wing-back chair, eyes wide, one hand still grasping the letter opener on his desk as though he had planned to use it but never got the chance. Poirot had been summoned the next day, having only just returned to London from Dover. The news had reached him in the Morning Post, an anonymous letter, unsigned but unmistakable in tone. They will say it was the wife. But she smiles too easily. Look deeper, Monsieur Poirot. Look beyond the obvious, and hurry. Such letters did not appear every day. And so Poirot came to Greywater. The house was old, filled with the kind of dampness that crept between the bones, and the lingering scent of pipe smoke, oak polish, and something else, bitter, faintly metallic. Poirot began, as always, not with the scene of the crime, but with the people. There was, of course, Eliza Farnham, beautiful, composed, and now widowed for the second time. Her first husband, a professor of botany, had died in a greenhouse collapse in the Americas. A tragedy. No questions asked. Poirot asked them anyway. Then there was Geoffrey Loring, Edward's business partner, a man with shoulders too square and knuckles that bore the marks of old bar fights he pretended never happened. He claimed to have been in town the night of the murder, drinking at the Swan, half a dozen witnesses to confirm it. But Poirot noted that none of the witnesses could agree what time he'd left. And lastly, Penelope Harrow, a childhood friend of Eliza's, now her companion and secretary, quiet, polite, but too quiet, too quick to avoid direct questions. When Poirot asked where she had been that evening, she replied, "I was in the drawing room with the music on. I heard nothing. I saw nothing. It was too rehearsed, too convenient. The gun had belonged to Edward, kept in a locked drawer. The drawer had not been forced. Only someone with the key, or someone who knew where it was hidden, could have taken it. The key, as it turned out, was in Eliza's dressing table. She admitted to knowing its location. But I hadn't touched it in years, she said. A curious thing to say, madame, Poirot murmured. Most wives would not remember such details, or pretend not to. She didn't smile that time, but her eyes were still wrong. Poirot walked the estate that evening, cane tapping lightly on the gravel path. The sea mist drifted in, thick and ghostly, and he paused near the garden wall, staring at the broken rosebush just beneath the study window. A heel print. Small, delicate, and fresh. Inside, Clara, the maid, scrubbed the study floor for the second time. Poirot watched her work. "You are troubled," he said. She hesitated. "It's just, Mr. Farnham was not a kind man, but he didn't deserve—" Poirot waited. "I heard shouting, the night before he died." "Who was shouting, mademoiselle?" Clara glanced down. "Mrs. Farnham, but not at him, at someone on the telephone." It was something. A crack. The next day, Poirot staged a test. He gathered the suspects for an interview. One by one, he asked them about the evening in question. Their stories were identical, too identical. Each spoke of times and locations with near-perfect alignment. Poirot feigned irritation. "Bah, I grow weary of these answers, always so neat, so clean, so improbable." Eliza raised an eyebrow. You think we rehearsed them? I think, Poirot said gently, that truth rarely walks in step. He left them then, retreating to the study. There, he opened the drawer once more and examined the gun's case. Inside, beneath the velvet lining, he found a small scrap of folded paper, torn from a larger sheet. On it, the words, "You promised it would never come out. If it does, we both hang." Not in Eliza's handwriting. He checked the blotter. Faint impressions. He took the paper to the mirror, held it up. The angle was wrong. The ink pressure inconsistent. Someone had written the note hastily, then hidden it too carefully for someone in panic. No, it was planted. Red herring. That night, Poirot returned to the garden. He traced the window, climbed the stone path, and examined the latch. From the inside, it was locked, but a scratch on the sill, a scrape of metal, told him it had been pried open recently, not violently, but with intent. He looked down again at the rose bush. The second heel print was deeper, a stumble, a pause. The killer had waited there, watched, entered not by door, but by silence. The gun had been taken earlier, the drawer opened, the murder committed, while the sea raged outside and the music played in the drawing room. He called them all together in the parlor. The fire burned high, shadows danced on the walls. Poirot stood before them, not as a man seeking truth, but as a man who already knew. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "there is a saying, the eyes are the window to the soul. But in this case, it is not the soul that betrayed the murderer. It is the smile." He turned to Eliza. "You lied, madame, but not about the killing." The room tensed. "You found him dead. Yes, but you knew who killed him, and you protected them." Eliza said nothing. "Penelope Harrow," Poirot said softly. "You entered the study that night, through the garden. You argued with Edward. He threatened you." Her lips parted. "I didn't. You killed him. The gun was already taken." He reached for the letter opener. "You were quicker." She shook her head. "Ah, but you left your heel print on the bush. A small thing. But murder is full of small things." Tears welled in her eyes. "I loved her," she whispered. "I loved Eliza. He found out, said he'd expose us, ruin her. I had to protect her." Eliza wept then, silently. Poirot nodded sadly. "You took the blame with a smile," he said. "Not to hide guilt, but to shield love." Penelope was arrested. The story was buried in the society pages weeks later, but Poirot remembered. He stood once more in the empty study, the ocean hissing below the cliffs, and whispered to the silent house, "It is not always hate that kills. Sometimes it is love, twisted by fear, and given a trigger." He looked out to sea. And those who smile, smile not always from peace. Sometimes they smile to keep from breaking. And then he turned away and left Greywater behind. Chapter 4. Blood in the Ivy. What was hidden behind the estate's charm? The scream came just as the clock in the tower struck 11. It sliced through the quiet of the Hampshire countryside like a knife through silk, high, sharp, unmistakably human. It came from the garden, from the thick curtain of ivy that cloaked the east wall of Wrenmore Estate. A moment later, the silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was thick, heavy, with a knowing stillness. Something awful had happened, and everyone in the house seemed to know it before the words had even been spoken. Poirot was not at the estate by coincidence. He had been invited, albeit reluctantly, by Lord Ambrose Hemsley, a man of stiff collars and clipped words who had never trusted anyone who ironed their moustache. But the invitation came not from Lord Hemsley himself. It came from the lady of the house, Eleanor Hemsley, soft-spoken, composed, with eyes that watched everything and revealed nothing. She had written to Poirot 2 weeks prior with a curious phrase: "There is something wrong at Renmoor, something rotting beneath the ivy." Poirot never ignored rot. By the time he arrived at the garden, the staff had gathered in a loose, uncertain circle. In the centre, crouched on the flagstones near the ivy-covered wall, was the groundskeeper, Thomas Sykes, muttering under his breath, his hands bloodied and shaking. The body lay just beyond him, half concealed in the dense vines, the fabric of a jacket torn, white linen soaked crimson, and a pair of unseeing eyes staring through a slit in the foliage as though trying to escape even in death. Poirot bent carefully, examining the scene. The victim was male, perhaps mid-30s, unfamiliar to the household staff. He had no identification, no wallet, no personal effects at all, except for a single gold cufflink engraved with a curious symbol, a heron perched atop a serpent. His shoes, Poirot noted, were too clean. Expensive, yes, but wrong for the countryside. The soles bore no trace of the soil from the estate grounds. In short, the man had not walked to Renmoor. He had been brought. He had not died in the garden. He had been left there. Poirot's eyes moved to the ivy. Blood spattered across its lower branches, yes, but higher up, there was something more. A faint tear, fresh, and tucked within the leaves, a glint of metal, a thin silver chain. Poirot extracted it with tweezers. On the chain, a charm in the shape of a compass rose. North, pointing just off-center. "Curious," he murmured. "So many things that wish to point the way, and yet all refuse to face the truth directly." The police were called, but Poirot remained. As always, his presence was tolerated more than welcomed, and yet none could deny his mind was faster than any inspector's pen. The suspects, as always, were within reach. Eleanor Hemsley, the poised matriarch who had first sounded the alarm. Her expression betrayed nothing, but her hands clutched her shawl as, though bracing against something far colder than the breeze. Nigel Hemsley, the Lord's younger brother, a man of erratic charm and dubious business dealings, recently returned from South Africa after nearly a decade abroad. He claimed to be seeking reconciliation. Poirot doubted he had come for tea. And Margot Bellamy, the live-in companion of Eleanor's late sister, a quiet woman with a tragic past and a gaze that shifted too easily from the windows to the shadows beneath the drapes. She was known, in the village, as a recluse. Yet Poirot noticed the recent scuff on her polished boot and the faint trace of something green beneath the cuff of her sleeve. Ivy. In the drawing room that evening, Poirot studied the household as they moved through their roles, mourning, shocked, indignant. Lord Hemsley blustered about privacy. Eleanor offered warm smiles, with eyes too sharp. Nigel poured brandy with a too steady hand, and Margot said nothing at all. "A stranger is found murdered on your property," Poirot said mildly, "and none of you know him?" 3 heads shook. 3 liars. Later, Poirot wandered the east wing of the house, his feet silent on the Persian rugs, the only sound the ticking of the long case clock in the hallway. Tick, 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 and then, at precisely midnight, a sharp metallic clink. He turned. A door had closed. Softly. It led to the library. Inside, the fire had burned low. A book lay open on the desk, Latin insignia and the secret societies of Europe. Poirot examined it. A page had been folded. The illustration matched the cufflink found on the body. The Heron Society, a short-lived exclusive order of Cambridge men from the early 1900s. Disbanded. Forgotten. Or perhaps not. The next day brought a twist. The village postmaster, having heard of the death, came forward. A letter, undelivered, had been mistakenly sorted into the outgoing box. The envelope, addressed to Renmore House, bore no return address. Poirot opened it with gloves. He remembers. He is coming. You cannot hide forever beneath your ivy walls. There was no signature. Poirot gathered the suspects once more. There are 2 deaths at Renmore, he said. One of the body in the garden, the other of truth, long buried beneath vines and sentiment. He turned to Nigel. You were expelled from Cambridge, were you not? A scandal. A man disappeared. A society dissolved. Nigel bristled. That was decades ago. Ah, but time, monsieur, does not erase guilt. It only dulls it until someone sharpens it again. He turned next to Margot. You knew the dead man. You tried to help him. He came to you, and you hid him. She paled. I didn't. He wasn't supposed to die. He just wanted to speak to Eleanor. Who is he? Her voice cracked. David. David Hayward. He was Eleanor's son. The room exploded in gasps. Poirot closed his eyes. Adopted at birth, hidden to avoid scandal. But when Eleanor's sister died, Margot found the letters. She found the truth. David was told. He returned. And Eleanor, he opened his eyes, was afraid. No, Eleanor said softly. Not afraid. Desperate. He wanted to take everything. The estate. My name. My life. He was going to tell Ambrose. Tell the world. I offered him money. He refused. He wanted blood for blood. Poirot looked at her. So you gave it to him. She did not deny it. I did not kill him, she said. But I let him leave. Through the garden. I knew what would happen. I knew Nigel was waiting. Nigel stared. You set me up. He was. A threat, she said simply. Poirot nodded. And the ivy, it hides many things. But not forever. The police came. Eleanor was taken quietly, with dignity intact. Nigel, betrayed, wept not for the dead, but for his name, now ruined a second time. As for Margot, she remained. She walked the garden every morning, tending the ivy that now grew over a new headstone. Poirot stood once more beneath the tower clock. The wind stirred the leaves, and the vines danced over the wall like fingers reaching backward in time. Charm, mes amis, he whispered, is only the mask worn by memory, and memory always bleeds through. He turned away. The ivy rustled behind him, whispering secrets only the dead could understand. Chapter 5. The clue Poirot missed. Even the greatest detective can be wrong. The candle shattered against the floor as the scream rang out, echoing through the cold stone corridors of Blackfield Abbey. Not a cry of pain, nor even terror. Something worse. It was the kind of scream that came from discovering something you cannot ever unsee, the kind that strips the world of order in one moment. Poirot froze, his gloved hand still on the polished brass banister of the staircase, and turned slowly toward the west wing. His eyes narrowed, and though his step was as quiet as ever, his thoughts were a storm. One does not expect blood in a chapel, and yet that is where it was found. Lady Agnes Willoughby lay slumped across the ancient kneeler beneath the stained glass of St. Bartholomew, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her neck darkened with bruising, and a jagged line of dried blood trailing from her temple. Her white prayer shawl was soaked crimson at the edge, and beneath her, clasped hands, was a rosary, broken, the beads scattered like tiny bones across the stone floor. The candlelight flickered across her face, casting her features in shifting relief, peaceful one moment, stricken the next. Poirot approached slowly. He had seen many faces in death. This one was different, not because it was more tragic, but because he had spoken with her less than an hour ago, and he had missed it. "Monsieur Poirot," Inspector Cray said, stepping forward with a pale expression. "You were the last to speak with her, weren't you?" "Oui," Poirot replied softly, "and she asked me a question I did not fully understand. A question, mon ami, that now haunts me." He bent down. The beads were all accounted for, except the third. Gone. That was strange. Poirot's brow furrowed. He had always believed that the smallest thing reveals the greatest truth, but he had failed to see the missing thread unraveling before him. Lady Agnes had summoned Poirot to Blackfield under the pretense of uncovering a family inheritance dispute. A forgery, perhaps, a quiet betrayal. She was worried about a man named Elliot Ashcroft, her late husband's former aide-de-camp. A man who had returned to the estate after 10 years abroad, now the guest of her son, Julian Willoughby. She had said rather cryptically, "I fear what lies beneath this roof has not returned. It has been waiting." Poirot had considered it poetry, nothing more. Now she was dead. The suspects were few. The abbey was remote, surrounded by storm-drenched moors, and the only access by motorcar was a single winding road watched by the groundskeeper's cottage. No one had arrived or left in the past 24 hours. Julian Willoughby, the son and heir, had been in the billiards room at the time of death, drinking brandy with his cousin, Lydia Ashcroft, who herself had a past too tidy to trust. Both claimed to have heard nothing, yet Poirot noted that Julian's jacket bore a faint streak of wax, as if from a candle, touched too closely. And Lydia, she had gone pale when she saw the body, yes, but her first words had not been of grief. They had been, "It wasn't supposed to be her." Elliot Ashcroft, meanwhile, said little, a tall, quiet man with military stiffness and hands that never stopped moving. When Poirot asked what had brought him back, he answered, "A letter." When pressed to show it, he claimed it had been destroyed. Destroyed, yes. Convenient. Poirot searched the chapel carefully. There were footprints leading from the north door, faint but visible in the layer of dust that had settled along the aisle. They stopped at the pew, where the candle had been knocked from its brass sconce. The blood, the broken rosary, the missing bead, it all told a story. But which one? He questioned each of them again. Julian spoke in circles. He admitted that his relationship with his mother had grown cold. "She never forgave me for choosing Ashcroft's word over hers," he said. "But I didn't kill her." Lydia was defensive. "She was always so suspicious of me, of everything. She hated that I came back with Elliot. She thought I was trying to take something from her." "And were you, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked gently. Her lips trembled. "Number only, the truth." Poirot turned to Elliot. "And you, monsieur, you served Lord Willoughby for many years. What do you know of the inheritance?" "I know that it was built on silence," he replied, "and that the silence is beginning to scream." The second clue came not from the chapel, but from the library. Poirot had spent hours searching the house before he returned to the desk where Lady Agnes had last written a letter. Inside the drawer, a folded parchment, torn at the top, dated 6 days ago. It read, "Should anything happen to me, I ask that my son not inherit the estate until this matter is resolved. I suspect the forgery was made by, but the rest had been ripped away. Poirot cursed himself. He had spoken with her too briefly, dismissed her unease as a mother's worry, and now she was gone. It was not only that he had missed something, it was that he had ignored something. That night, Poirot walked the chapel alone. The storm outside thundered like judgment. He stood where her body had lain, and he spoke aloud. "I am sorry, madame. Hercule Poirot has failed you." Then, like a whisper from beyond, he remembered. The question. Lady Agnes had asked, "What do you see when you look at the glass?" He had thought it a riddle. Now he turned toward the stained glass window behind the altar. It depicted St. Bartholomew holding a scroll, but in the center pane, something shimmered oddly. Poirot stepped closer. The lead was newer, replaced, not ancient like the others. He touched it. The pane opened. Inside, hidden in the hollow recess of the wall, was the final clue. A leather journal, bound in red. Lady Agnes's private diary. He read it by candlelight. The entries were meticulous, detailed. And then came the truth. 10 years ago, Lord Willoughby had rewritten his will. He had disinherited Julian. The heir would instead be someone named E.A. Elliot Ashcroft. But the will had vanished, and the version that surfaced after the Lord's death restored the estate to Julian. Agnes had suspected Elliot of forging the disappearance. But she was wrong. Poirot gathered them in the drawing room. Outside, the rain had ceased. The clock ticked in the silence. "There has been murder," Poirot said. "But before there was blood, there was deception. And before deception, there was betrayal." He looked at Julian. "You discovered the truth, that your father meant to leave everything to Elliot. You were angry, and you sought to protect your legacy." Julian shook his head. "That's absurd." "No, that is motive." Poirot turned to Lydia. "And you, mademoiselle, you knew of the change. You supported it. And Lady Agnes suspected you of wrongdoing. That was why she said it wasn't supposed to be her." Lydia swallowed. She thought Elliot was the danger, but the danger was you. Poirot faced Elliot. "You received no letter, did you? You came because Lydia told you to. She lured you here, knowing Agnes would react. And when she confronted her in the chapel, Lydia pushed her." Lydia stood. No, it was an accident." Poirot nodded. "Yes, you did not mean to kill, but when she fell, you ran. And when Elliot found her moments later, he panicked. He wiped the beads. He took the missing one, the bloodied one, and he hid it, because he thought he had done it." Elliot slumped in his chair. "She was already gone," he whispered. "And the final clue," Poirot said, "was the broken rosary. Not symbolic, not spiritual, merely practical. It told me how she died, not by force, but by fall. Struck her head. And the blood in the ivy, it was not from a premeditated act. It was from chaos, confusion, fear." The room fell silent. Poirot turned once more to the diary and closed it. "I missed the clue. I missed her fear. And because of that, a woman died. I will live with that. But you, Mademoiselle Lydia, you must now live with what you did in silence." The police came. Lydia was taken. Elliot left the house in the morning fog. Julian remained, staring at the empty hearth, with eyes that held no victory. As Poirot packed his suitcase, he paused. In the window, the rain had returned. He whispered to himself, "Even the greatest detective can be wrong. But it is what he does after the mistake that reveals the truth of him." And then, with a heavy heart, he stepped into the mist. Chapter 6. The Doctor's Secret Hour. His story checks out until the timeline unravels. The wristwatch was still ticking when they found the body. Ticking, despite the shattered glass and the blood that had dried along its strap like rust. The time it marked, 8:17 p.m., precisely. But the clock on the mantelpiece read 9:02. That was the first inconsistency. The second came moments later, when the household physician, Dr. Lionel Ambrose, stepped through the parlor door and said with calm authority, "He was alive when I left him. I saw him shortly after 8, perhaps 8:15 at the latest." His voice was firm, measured, but Poirot saw the flicker, the most delicate hesitation in the corner of the man's eye. It had been raining when the murder occurred. The storm came down in thin, bitter lines, slicing across the windows of Halberton House like glass threads. Wind clawed at the eaves and whistled through the stone chimneys. Inside, however, everything remained elegant, untouched. The body of Edward Montclair, financier, philanthropist, and quiet collector of powerful enemies, was found alone in his study. A single gunshot to the heart, no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, no missing items. It had all the precision of a performance, and it was Poirot's second visit to the house that month. He had come not on business, but as a guest, invited by Montclair for a private dinner to discuss, as he had put it, a matter of discretion and discretion alone. But that conversation never happened. Before Poirot could arrive, the man lay dead, and the guests were assembled in the drawing room like chess pieces already aligned. Only the king had been tipped over. The doctor's story was simple. He had checked on Montclair in his study shortly after 8, finding him in excellent health but somewhat agitated. A routine check, he insisted. He had mentioned chest pain the day before. He claimed to have departed by 8:20 and spoken with Lady Halberton in the East Conservatory until just before 9, when the gunshot was heard. Poirot took the physician's hand gently as they stood over the body. "A curious thing, Doctor," he said, "for a man to be shot cleanly in the heart and yet make no sound." Ambrose tilted his head. It was instantaneous. He would have died immediately. "We," said Poirot softly, "unless he was already dead before the shot was fired." And with that, the mystery deepened. 3 others had been present that evening. Lady Halberton herself, widow to the previous lord and long-time friend of Montclair's late wife, a gracious woman with nerves like violin strings, taut, fragile, and always on the verge of snapping. She had hosted the evening with admirable grace, but Poirot saw the tremble in her glass when she poured her brandy. Not the tremble of grief, but of memory. Then there was Quentin Vale, Montclair's protégé and heir to the Halberton Trust. A man of ambition, cloaked in silk, a perfectly cut waistcoat, shoes polished like obsidian, and eyes that revealed too much pride to be sincere. His alibi was precise. He had been in the library with Mrs. Catherine Loring, a literary critic with a reputation for sharp insight and sharper retorts. They had, conveniently, been debating the themes of betrayal in Jacobean tragedies. "Symbolic," Poirot murmured. The initial investigation yielded little. No fingerprints but Montclair's on the weapon, which lay neatly on the desk, not fallen, but placed. A suicide? No note. And Poirot had dined with the man the week before. He had been full of purpose, of unease, yes, but not despair. There had been something he needed to reveal, something he never got the chance to say. Poirot returned to the study late that night, alone. He lit a single candle, The shadows flickered across the walls. He studied the shelves, not the books themselves, but the dust. 3 volumes had been removed recently. He traced the faint lines where the dust had not yet settled. Titles: Erasures of Trust, Medical Ethics in Conflict, and The Poisoner's Compendium. Curious bedtime reading for a financier. He examined the carpet. A subtle indentation beneath the armchair angled oddly from the others, as if someone had stood behind it, watching, waiting. Poirot bent and retrieved a thread of dark wool, too coarse for Montclair's attire. The next morning, he summoned the doctor. "You say you visited the study at 8:15. "Yes, and left at 8:20. "That is correct. And you heard no shot?" "None." "Tell me, do you own a coat with wool of this texture?" Poirot held out the thread. The doctor blinked. I believe so." Poirot did not press. He merely smiled. The second twist came later that day. Mrs. Loring approached Poirot privately. "There's something I didn't tell the police," she said, her voice low. "I saw the doctor return to the study just before the gunshot. I was on the landing above. He didn't see me." "Are you certain?" "I'd stake my reputation on it." Poirot stared at her. "Mademoiselle, reputation is often the first casualty in a murder." Still, her information gave weight to his suspicion. The doctor's timeline was fraying. Act 2. The Unraveling. Poirot observed the household with the precision of a surgeon. He noted that Quentin Vale never touched his drink unless someone else poured it. He watched how Lady Halberton always stepped around the third stair on the main staircase. Old habit? Or muscle memory from a night when silence mattered? He asked the staff about the study. The maid, Elsie, mentioned something strange. Mr. Montclair's paperweight, he always kept it on the left, but after he died, it was on the right. "Did anyone touch it?" "No, sir, not after. Only maybe before." Poirot returned to the desk. The paperweight was heavy, yes, but beneath it, pressed into the grain of the wood, was a faint, circular imprint. A pill case had been here. He called the doctor again. "Did Mr. Montclair take any medication?" "Only aspirin. Occasionally." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, there are no pills found. Not in the drawers, not in the study." Ambrose hesitated. "Perhaps he kept them elsewhere." Poirot smiled politely. "Perhaps." That evening, Poirot staged a dinner, a final act. The guests gathered around the table. Candles flickered. Wine was poured. The storm outside had returned, washing the windows with wind and rain. Poirot rose. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "it is said that a doctor's word is sacrosanct, that we must trust the one who holds our heart in his hand. But sometimes the one who heals is also the one who harms." All eyes turned. Poirot walked slowly toward the fireplace. Edward Montclair did not die of a gunshot. Not at first. He was poisoned. A slow-acting compound, taken with a drink, perhaps in his brandy, perhaps in a pill. He would have felt chest pains, disorientation, then collapse. He faced Ambrose. "You knew he had ingested something. You found him unwell, slumped in his chair. And you panicked." Ambrose stood. "That's absurd." "No," Poirot said softly. "It is human. You did not administer the poison, but you feared you would be blamed. So you returned. After the others had gone to their rooms, you shot him, post-mortem, to stage a clean suicide, to erase the time he truly died." Gasps. Lady Halberton whispered, "Then who—" Poirot turned to her. "You, madam." She froze. "You poisoned him. You had the motive. Montclair had discovered that your late husband's estate was not yours to hold. that it had been forged, willed to Quentin Vale by right. You faced ruin. Lady Halberton trembled. No. You slipped the poison into his drink after dinner. But when he called for the doctor, you realized your timing was flawed. When he didn't die on schedule, you prayed the doctor would cover your mistake. And he did. Ambrose slumped. She begged me, he whispered. Told me she'd lose everything. I didn't mean to. Poirot nodded. Indeed, you were guilty, but not of the murder, only of the cover-up, a crime of fear, not of greed. As the police arrived, Poirot stood alone by the mantel. He watched the flames dance in the hearth and whispered, The truth, like time, cannot be altered. It ticks, it waits, and when the hour comes, it demands to be heard. And so it had. Chapter 7. Whispers beneath the floorboards. A sound no one else heard. A truth no one wants. It began with a sound. A faint tapping. Soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat muffled by dust and time. It came from the floor beneath the bed in room 9 at Thistlecroft Hall, a decaying Georgian manor in Northumberland where the rain never seemed to stop and the ivy never ceased its climb. The guest who heard it was a girl of 17. She screamed, not because she saw anything, but because she heard something no one else did. And by morning, she was gone. Poirot had arrived not as a detective, but as a guest. A rare holiday, he had told himself. Solitude, quiet. But as always, the quiet had teeth. The hall was hosting a weekend gathering, a literary salon of sorts, where 3 former university friends, Dr. Marcus Vellum, novelist Madeline Crowhurst, and theatre producer Basil Lee, had reunited to celebrate the publication of Madeline's new book. Each had brought a guest. Each harboured old bonds and older wounds. And each, Poirot soon observed, lied even in their laughter. The girl who vanished was Lila Archer, Madeline's ward, a sharp-minded child, with a face too pale for her age and a mouth that always seemed to know more than it said. She had wandered into room 9 during a game of hide-and-seek that none of the adults had noticed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Greeley, found the room empty at dawn. No blood, no struggle, just the bed, left neatly made, and the faintest indentation in the dust-covered corner by the fireplace. Poirot was the first to enter after the constable. He stood in the center of the room and closed his eyes. The air was still, yet not quiet. A breathless silence. He pressed his hand to the floorboard beneath the window and tapped lightly, once, twice. There it was again, the sound, like fingers tapping from below. He said nothing to the others. Not yet. Later that day, they assembled in the drawing room where the fire struggled to warm, the high-ceilinged gloom. Dr. Vellum paced near the hearth, muttering about dreams and psychic residue. Madeline sat curled in a corner chair, clutching a silk scarf to her mouth. Basil Lee poured whiskey far too early in the day. Accidents happen, Basil said. She's a troubled girl. Perhaps she ran away. Poirot raised an eyebrow. It is possible, monsieur. But tell me, did she pack her shoes before escaping into the wild moors? They stared. They were beneath the bed, Poirot said softly. Clean. Untouched. It is rare that a runaway takes nothing but her courage. In Act 1, the chaos had no face, only the echo of footsteps and the absence of a girl. Poirot requested permission to search the manor. Lord Hemsley, the estate's owner and reluctant host, agreed. His family had abandoned the hall decades ago, leaving only the west wing occupied and the east wing sealed for reasons no one cared to explain. No one's lived in that side for years, he muttered. It's full of rot and rats. Poirot smiled politely. Ah, but rats, monsieur. They have such excellent memories. He began in the attic. Cobwebs laced the rafters. Beneath the floorboards, the hollow space between beams stretched like a lung beneath the skin of the house. Poirot measured the dimensions of room 9 from above. A strange discrepancy. The ceiling below should have been flush. It was not. A hidden chamber, perhaps no larger than a wardrobe. The floor creaked, then a hollow thud. He tapped again. A second sound. Whispers. He descended to room 9 with haste and knelt by the fireplace. The floor was dusty, but a square of it had been cleaned, by hand and recently. He pressed there. It gave way with a sharp click. A panel slid open. Inside, a narrow compartment, no more than a crawl space, empty, except for a broken locket and a scrap of fabric caught on a nail. A child's shawl. He called for Madeleine. When she entered, Poirot held out the locket. Her hands trembled. She told me she'd seen something, she whispered, the night before she vanished. A man in the corridor, watching her through the crack in the door. Why did you not report this? Poirot asked gently. She makes things up, Madeleine said. She's always been imaginative. Poirot said nothing, but in his mind he was arranging pieces on a board that none of them could see. Act 2 brought the false reveals. The constable uncovered an old police file. Another girl. Another disappearance. 23 years prior. Same room. Same age. Never solved. Poirot questioned the housekeeper. I was here then, Mrs. Greeley admitted, but it was hushed up. Her father, he paid handsomely for silence. Her father, Dr. Marcus Vellum. Poirot said nothing. He returned to the study and invited Dr. Vellum for tea. I have always believed, monsieur, Poirot said lightly, that the most dangerous men are not those who kill with rage, but those who erase with calm. Vellum raised an eyebrow. You suspect me of something? Poirot smiled. I suspect everyone. It is most efficient. Later, Basil Lee confided in Poirot over port. I saw Marcus in the East Wing last night. Thought nothing of it, until the girl vanished. Why did you not tell this to the constable? Basil hesitated. Because I owe Marcus my life. Years ago, he covered a scandal that could have destroyed me. We all owe him. Ah, said Poirot, and that, mon ami, is the most dangerous kind of loyalty. Clues came like raindrops, sparse, scattered, soaking slowly through the fabric of lies. A journal found in Madeleine's room, entries from Lila, written in cipher. Poirot deciphered them by the firelight. He comes at night. He stands by the door. He whispers, but no one hears. He says she never screamed loud enough. The final entry was unfinished. A single sentence. I found the hollow place. Act 3. The truth. Poirot gathered them all in the great hall, the fire roaring as thunder rolled outside. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, this house is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by memory and by secrets, one secret in particular that was hidden beneath the floorboards of room 9. He paced slowly. 2 girls, gone, both last seen in the same room, and both connected not by blood, but by silence. He turned to Madeleine. You knew, mademoiselle. The first girl was your half-sister. You kept her name hidden. You kept her locket. Madeleine looked away. Poirot turned to Basil. You saw Dr. Vellum in the East Wing. He was not walking. He was burying something. He turned to Marcus. You have lied for 23 years. Vellum stood. You have no proof. Non, Poirot said. but I have the floorboards." He stepped to the fireplace and pressed again. The panel opened. Beneath it, in a deeper recess, the constables had found the bones. They belonged to Clara Vellum, your daughter, the first girl. You killed her, perhaps by accident, perhaps not, but you hid her there. And when Lila discovered the hollow place, when she told Madeline, she too vanished. A door creaked. From the back of the hall, Lila stepped forward, alive, shaking. She had hidden in the priest's hole, behind the organ, where she'd read Clara's diary, found days before. She had been too afraid to speak, until now. Vellum collapsed in his chair. Poirot stepped forward, not triumphant, but solemn. "We do not bury the truth," he said. "We build houses on top of it. But always in the quiet, the truth whispers beneath the floorboards, waiting." And now it had been heard. Chapter 8. The locked door that opened itself. No key, no break-in, only dread. The door creaked open at precisely 2:17 a.m. A sound too deliberate for chance, too still for wind. There had been no footsteps, no rattling of keys, no turning of locks, just the groan of ancient hinges and the soft whisper of dread slipping in like a shadow under the threshold. Lady Blanchwood screamed, though no one was there to hear it. By morning, the East Wing's blue room, sealed, locked from the outside, its iron key, untouched in a box in the butler's study, stood open, and someone had been inside. Poirot arrived at Ravenhurst Manor the following afternoon. The house loomed over the Wiltshire moorland like a watchful sentinel, its turrets clawing at the grey sky, ivy curled like veins around its bones. He had been summoned by Inspector Hemsley, who met him with an expression not of confusion, but of something else. Embarrassment, perhaps. "No sign of forced entry," Hemsley muttered. "No footprints. Room's been locked for weeks. And yet, someone was in there." Poirot did not reply. He simply adjusted his cuffs, stepped over the threshold, and allowed the chill of the manor to embrace him. The Blue Room had once belonged to Lord Alaric Blanchwood, the reclusive uncle of Lady Blanchwood's late husband. A painter, some whispered. Others said, madman. He had died in that room under uncertain circumstances. Since then, it had remained locked, untouched, and yet the scent of turpentine still clung faintly in the air. Poirot stood in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping like a scalpel. The carpet was undisturbed, the windows latched, but on the writing desk sat a single item that should not have been there, a paintbrush, wet with fresh pigment, its bristles resting on an empty page. "Monsieur Poirot." Lady Blanchwood's voice trembled from the doorway. "That brush, it was not there yesterday. I would stake my life on it." "Let us hope, madame," Poirot replied, gently, "that your life need not be staked at all." She wore black, not for mourning, but out of habit. Her eyes, pale blue and brittle, flicked toward the canvas draped in the corner. Poirot stepped toward it, but did not lift the cloth. Not yet. The suspects were few. Lady Blanchwood herself, who had locked the room decades ago and insisted it remain sealed. Her nephew Thomas, a brooding musician, returned from the continent under vague pretenses. The housekeeper, Mrs. Betts, whose silence was almost aggressive in its precision, and the family physician, Dr. Malcolm Avery, whose alibi, Poirot noted, was both detailed and over-practiced. "I was in the village surgery all evening," he said, with a serene smile. "Patients can confirm." "And yet," Poirot said, "I did not ask for your whereabouts until now." Act 1, the door, and the disruption. In the days that followed, Poirot observed. He did not pry. He did not accuse. He listened to the floorboards, to the ticking clocks, to the breath that caught too sharply in Mrs. Betts's throat when she passed the blue room. And always the question lingered. How did a locked door open by itself? The answer, he knew, was simple. It did not. It was opened. Act 2. Misdirection and masks. The house's servants whispered that Lord Alaric had never truly left. They said his paintings moved at night, that the blue room breathed. Poirot dismissed the superstition. But he did not dismiss the brush. One evening, when all others had retired, Poirot returned to the blue room. This time, he pulled away the canvas. The portrait beneath was unfinished. Half a face, sketched in charcoal, the lines sharp and angular. The subject, a woman. Familiar. Too familiar. Lady Blanchwood. He asked her about it the next morning. She denied ever sitting for the portrait. Denied it even being started. Poirot did not believe her. The second twist arrived when he discovered the old plans for the manor. There was no blue room, or rather, there had been, but it had been renovated decades ago. The space had been divided, a false wall erected, a corridor sealed off, and a second door leading into a passage between the walls, a hidden entrance. Poirot examined the floor by the bed and found it. A seam in the paneling, a catch, a whisper of air from beneath, and footprints in the dust. Small, light, too light for Thomas, too light for Dr. Avery, too small even for Mrs. Betts. Act 3. The Unveiling. Poirot gathered them all in the great hall, where the portraits of past Blanchwoods glared down with oil-painted disdain. There is a door in this house, he said softly, that was never meant to be opened, and yet it was. Not by a ghost, but by a woman. He turned to Lady Blanchwood. You lied to me, madame. You posed for that painting. You loved Alaric, but when he discovered your affair with the physician, he threatened to expose you, and so you had him sealed away in that room, alive. A collective gasp. Poirot raised a hand. No, you did not kill him. You locked the door. You told yourself it was mercy, but he lived for days before he died. Painting, writing, waiting, and you left him. Lady Blanchwood's eyes shone now, not from denial, but from memory. I thought it was over, she whispered. It was, Poirot replied, until your nephew found the journal. He turned to Thomas. You discovered the hidden passage. You read Alaric's last words. You returned to finish what your family began, to confront your aunt. But you lacked the courage, so you tried to frighten her. You opened the door from within. You left the brush. You hoped she would confess. Thomas said nothing. Poirot looked back at the canvas. It is unfinished, he said, just like the truth. But now it is complete. The police arrived. Thomas was taken, not for murder, but for trespassing into a truth he could not face. Lady Blanchwood remained, alone in the manor she had turned into a mausoleum. And as Poirot stepped into the rain, he paused at the threshold. Doors, mes amis, he murmured, are not always meant to open. Some protect, others imprison, but all of them, eventually, reveal. And with that, he disappeared into the mist, leaving the locked door behind him, finally at rest. Chapter 9. When Poirot doubt himself. For the first time, his method begins to fail. The scream did not come with fear. It came with certainty. That kind of sound, a raw, gut-bound shriek, came only when the mind accepts what the eyes should never have seen. It came from the winter room at Chislehurst Grange, and by the time Poirot arrived, the echo still lived in the walls. Harriet Vale was dead. The heiress to the Vale shipping fortune lay across the chaise longue, one slipper missing, her head tilted delicately to the side, like a porcelain doll hastily discarded. There was no sign of violence, no visible wound, no broken glass, no trace of struggle, only her untouched tea, still steaming, and a single fallen orchid petal on the carpet. The windows were locked from the inside. The door had been opened only when her maid, Elsie, discovered her at the turn of the hour. Poirot was not supposed to be there. He had come only for a weekend of respite, at the request of Harriet's fiancé, Lucien Carroway, a man with clever eyes and a voice too smooth for its own honesty. Poirot had known Harriet briefly through mutual acquaintance and had not seen her in years. But when he received Lucien's note, vague, urgent, he had felt a prickling instinct. "I cannot explain, Monsieur Poirot," the letter read, "but something is wrong. There is tension here that makes the very walls lean inward. Please come." Now she was dead, and Poirot's mind, usually so precise, so methodical, struggled to assemble its parts. He stared at the tea tray. 2 cups, one filled, one untouched. The untouched cup bore a faint lipstick print. His gaze shifted. Something was off, but he could not say what, and in that moment, the seeds of doubt, long dormant, stirred. "Ah," he thought bitterly, "so this is what it is to doubt oneself, like losing one's reflection in fog." The suspects were few, as always. Lucien, the fiancé, pale and stoic, with no tears but a perfectly rehearsed grief, claimed he had been walking the gardens alone when the scream came. Catherine Vale, Harriet's elder sister, who had returned from France only days before, following a mysterious absence of 5 years, cold, austere, and far too calm for the circumstance. Her relationship with Harriet, Poirot learned, had been complicated, strained by old wounds and matters of inheritance, and Jonathan Rook, the estate lawyer, Harriet's childhood friend and executor of her estate. Loyal to a fault, or so it seemed. But Poirot noticed how he did not look at Harriet's body, not once. The coroner reported natural causes, heart failure, but Poirot did not believe in coincidence, nor in timing so fatal, so poetic. He searched the room again. The orchid, Harriet's favorite flower, but it was not in bloom this season. It had to have been brought in specially. He examined the teacup. No residue, no bitterness, but something floral lingered faintly. Not jasmine, not chamomile, oleander. It was Catherine who provided the first twist. "I never meant to return," she said, standing in the long corridor beneath a portrait of their mother. "But Harriet wrote to me 3 weeks ago. She said she had something to confess, something that might change everything." "What was it, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked. "I don't know," Catherine whispered. "She died before she could tell me." Poirot remained still. The storm outside pressed against the windows. Inside, the clocks ticked louder. He watched Lucien. "You loved her?" Poirot asked. Lucien looked down. "I thought I did. And now, I don't know." He was honest, at least. Poirot followed the threads. The will had been changed days before Harriet's death. Catherine, long disinherited, was to receive a portion once again. But Jonathan Rook had not yet filed the document. Technically, under the old will, Lucien inherited everything. "How strange," Poirot murmured, "that grief and fortune often arrive arm in arm." But even as he said it, he felt uncertain. He returned to the winter room that evening. Alone, The fire burned low. The orchid petal had not been cleaned. Poirot knelt beside it and turned it gently between his fingers. A fragment broke free. Not a flower, a ribbon, cut from a corsage. He closed his eyes. The dress Harriet wore in the portrait above the hearth. Ivory silk, orchid corsage. Not what she had been wearing when found. Poirot stood. She had changed clothes. Why? Act 2. Confusion. He gathered them in the parlor the next day. "I'm troubled," he said, "because I, Hercule Poirot, am not sure." They stared. "I suspect each of you. For Lucien, the motive is money. For Catherine, jealousy and guilt. For Mr. Rook, perhaps a secret too long hidden. And yet, the facts do not align." He looked toward the portrait again, and then it came to him. The painting. He rushed from the room. He found it, Harriet's journals, hidden beneath the lining of her writing desk. They were coded, not difficult, but deliberate. He broke the cipher point. The final entry chilled him. "I have rewritten the will. I fear Lucien will be angry, but he must know the truth. I was never going to marry him. I still love Catherine. I always did." Everything fell into place. Act 3. Revelation. Poirot gathered them once more. "Harriet Vale," he began, "did not die of natural causes. She died of poison. Oleander, hidden in her tea, masked by a flower she adored." Gasps. "She was going to reveal the truth to you, Lucien, that she did not love you, that she had changed the will, that she had loved her sister." He turned. "But you did not kill her." Lucien exhaled. Poirot looked at Catherine. "You did not kill her either." Her expression did not change. He turned to Jonathan Rook. "You poisoned her, because she was going to tell the truth, that you had been altering documents in her name for years, signing checks, managing the trust, not as a steward, but as a thief. She found out. She wrote the letter to Catherine, and that same night, you delivered her tea." Rook was silent. Poirot stepped closer. "You counted on the coroner. You counted on the natural assumption, and you nearly fooled me." His voice dropped. "But you see, monsieur, the orchid, it does not bloom in December." Rook was arrested. Catherine wept, quietly. Lucien vanished back to London. As Poirot prepared to leave, he paused at the window. For the first time in his career, he had nearly failed. "I doubted myself," he said quietly to the empty room. "And in that doubt, I nearly missed a truth so small, so delicate, that it fluttered like a petal on the wind." Then he turned and was gone. Chapter 10. A witness, too afraid to speak. They saw it all, but silence is safer. The scream came not from the lips of the dead, but from the lips of the girl who had seen it all and said nothing. It echoed up the marble staircase of Evercrest House, bounced against the cracked walls of the West Wing, and died quietly in the velvet drapery of the East drawing room, where everything was always just slightly too quiet. The body of Sir Lionel Garraway was discovered 10 minutes later in the library, sprawled over a worn leather chair like a discarded coat, a letter opener buried cleanly between his ribs, his eyes wide open, staring straight into the fire. The girl, Lydia Hartley, age 17, was found trembling in the corridor just outside, not screaming anymore, just whispering. One word, over and over. No, no, no. She was the ward of Lady Rosalind Garraway, the widow. The two had lived at Evercrest for years, since Lydia's parents were killed in a boating accident. But there was no sign of Lady Rosalind, no sign of a struggle, no sign of entry, just death. Poirot arrived with the snow, a heavy, blinding storm, swept over the Northumberland countryside, cutting Evercrest off from the world. No roads, no carriages, no calls. A house of 8 people now became a house of suspects. The wind howled outside, but Poirot heard something worse. The silence within. He began, as always, with the body. Sir Lionel had been writing something when he was killed. A letter, perhaps, but the page had been torn from the blotter. All that remained was the impression. Poirot pressed the edge of a pencil against it and slowly revealed one word. Confession. A dramatic flourish, Poirot murmured, or perhaps something more. Lydia was mute. She had been since the scream. Dr. Ames, the family physician, said it was trauma. The mind protects itself, he offered, by shutting the door. Poirot said nothing, but he did not agree. Lydia was not broken. She was afraid. The suspects presented themselves quickly. Rosalind Garraway, the elegant widow, with ice-blue eyes and the manner of a woman who had learned long ago how to fold grief into fashion. Her stepson, Julian Garraway, a brooding scholar with ink-stained fingers and a dislike for company. Celeste Marwood, Lady Rosalind's companion, who appeared loyal but whose eyes flicked toward Lydia too often. And Dr. Ames, too friendly by half, whose calmness always preceded discomfort. Act 1. The Crime and Chaos. Sir Lionel, it turned out, had called them all together for a reason. He had intended to revise his will. Some changes must be made, he had told Rosalind just 2 days prior. Too many lies have festered in this house, but no new will had been found. Poirot walked the manor like a surgeon through a fevered body. In the study, he found the bottle of ink, recently disturbed, not Lionel's usual hand. In the wardrobe of Julian's room, he found a pair of leather gloves, one slightly damp and smudged with black residue. In the sitting-room fireplace, beneath a thin layer of ash, a burnt scrap of paper. Poirot removed it with tweezers. One word remained. Lydia. The girl had gone to the library that night. That was known. The maid, Helen, had seen her pass, but what she saw, or heard, remained trapped behind her lips. Poirot watched her from across the conservatory as snow laced the windows. She sat perfectly still, watching the world disappear under white. "You are afraid, mademoiselle," he said, gently, "but fear is only the shadow cast by truth. It is time to turn toward the light." She looked at him, her lips parted slightly, but still no words. Act 2. Clues, red herrings, and suspicions. Julian had motive. He had argued with his father over money, legacy, and the mystery woman Julian had recently begun seeing. A woman Lionel disapproved of. But Julian had an alibi. He had been with Celeste at the time of death, arguing over a letter that had arrived for Lydia. A letter that had since vanished. Celeste, meanwhile, had a secret. Poirot uncovered it in the smallest of details, the way she clutched her crucifix when she lied, the name she whispered in her sleep, overheard by the maid. Theo. It was not the name of any living person in the house, but it was the name of Lydia's father. Poirot confronted her. "You knew him," he said. "I did," Celeste admitted. "Before the accident. Before everything. Before the truth." She nodded. "I never meant to lie. I was trying to protect her." "Or protect yourself?" Poirot asked. Then came the twist. The letter was found, hidden in the base of the grandfather clock in the music room. It was addressed not to Lydia, but to Lionel, from someone named M. It read, "She remembers. I am certain. If she speaks, we are finished." Poirot stood by the fire that evening, hands behind his back, and thought long into the night. His usual precision felt dulled. There were too many paths, too many lies. And worse, there was something he had not yet seen. Had he missed it? Then Lydia's cat, a sleek black creature named Nero, leapt onto the chair beside him. It was covered in dust, white, unusual. Poirot followed the trail, to the old nursery, locked and forgotten. The dust on the floor was disturbed, small footprints, and in the corner, behind a pile of crates, a mirror, cracked. Lydia had been hiding here, watching. She had seen everything. He brought her there again, quietly. She stepped inside, touched the mirror, and tears welled in her eyes. Poirot placed the letter in her hand. She read it. Then finally, she spoke. It was Rosalind. Act 3. Poirot's reveal and the final twist. He gathered them in the library, snowstorm still raging outside, firelight flickering. Sir Lionel Garraway was murdered, Poirot began, and for a time, even Hercule Poirot did not see how. He turned to Rosalind. You feared exposure, not of an affair, not of theft, but of blood. Lydia's blood. She is not your ward. She is your daughter. Gasps. Your affair with Theo Hartley was secret. When he and his wife died, Lionel took the girl in. You allowed it, but when he discovered Lydia had begun to remember, when she received a letter from someone who knew, you panicked. You killed Lionel to preserve the lie. Rosalind was pale. You poisoned the tea. Quick, clean. Then you removed the will, burned the confession, hid the letter. Lydia stepped forward. I saw her. Through the mirror. She turned the key after. Rosalind wept. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just couldn't lose everything. Poirot's voice softened. But you did, madam, because in saving yourself, you destroyed what love remained. The police came. Rosalind went quietly. The snow stopped the next morning. Poirot stood at the gates as Lydia stared at the sunrise. She was afraid, she said softly. Like me. Poirot nodded. We. But you, mademoiselle, you found the courage to speak. And that, I think, will carry you further than silence ever could. Then, with a sigh, he turned toward the train station, his mind quiet for the first time in days. And in the frost-covered glass of the carriage, his reflection whispered, even the quietest witness can become the loudest truth. Chapter 11. The confession that changed nothing. He said he did it. So why does it still feel wrong? The storm began, just as the constable put the cuffs around his wrists. Outside the manor, wind howled through the ancient elms, tearing dead leaves from brittle branches as if nature itself meant to erase the past hour. Inside the drawing room, silence bloomed like smoke. Edward Langley stood by the fireplace, hands shackled, expression hollow, and said the words everyone thought would end it all. I killed her. Lady Margaret Ashcombe, his sister, clutched the back of a velvet chair and whispered, No. Inspector Caldor blinked, stunned by the suddenness of it all. You confess, sir? Freely? Yes, Edward said. I poisoned her tea. I watched her drink it. And just like that, the room seemed to breathe again. The drama was over. The criminal had confessed. But Hercule Poirot stood by the window, unmoving, his eyes fixed not on Edward, but on the tea tray on the sideboard. His fingers twitched, and he frowned. Something was wrong, not with the confession, but with the air, the rhythm of the scene. The silence didn't hum with relief. It pulsed with uncertainty. Strange, Poirot murmured to himself. He confesses. The crime is closed, and yet it sings in the wrong key. An hour earlier, Amelia Vexley had been found slumped in the rose parlour, her teacup tipped over, blood in the corners of her mouth, and a dead wasp floating in the remains of her chamomile. The cause of death had been fast-acting digitalis, foxglove essence, extracted and dropped into the sugar cube on her tray. The sugar had melted. The poison was gone. The cup, cleaned by the tea, almost elegant in its simplicity. Amelia Vexley was not loved. She was rich, cutting, and manipulative, with a sharp tongue and a sharper pen. She had published a memoir the month prior that excoriated every member of her own family and left no one untouched. The final truth, she had called it, and everyone at Ashcombe Hall had a reason to want her silent. Edward Langley, her nephew, had most to lose. A failed investment in Paris exposed in the book. His name and reputation hung by a thread. Margaret, Amelia's sister-in-law, was next. The memoir revealed an affair she had long buried, one that questioned her daughter's paternity. And then there was Clara Finch, Amelia's personal nurse, who had remained calm through the chaos, too calm, until Poirot asked her where she was between 3 and 4. Changing linens, she said, but the linens were folded, unslept in. Act 1, the crime and chaos had erupted perfectly. But now, with a confession so neat, Poirot felt the edges fray instead of seal. He sat with Edward in the small blue study while the storm rattled the glass. "Why now, monsieur?" Poirot asked. "You waited an hour. You watched as others were questioned." Edward stared at his hands. "I didn't want to lie anymore." "You do not strike me as a man broken by guilt." "No?" "No," Poirot said quietly. "You strike me as a man who believes this is your best option." Edward said nothing. Outside, the wind picked up. Poirot walked the crime scene again. The rose parlour was untouched since the body had been removed. The teacup remained, the tray neatly set, a single sugar cube left behind, untouched, crystalline. He examined the tray again. The cups bore initials. Avenue LMF. He frowned. "Curious," he whispered. In the hallway, Poirot found Margaret. Her eyes were red. "He didn't do it," she said. "But he confessed. He would protect me. He always has. When our father died, he let me keep the house. When my husband drank himself to ruin, Edward stepped in. He thinks I did it." "Did you?" "No," she said. "But I almost wanted to." That was not the same as a denial. Poirot made note. Act 2, the misdirection. Poirot interviewed Clara Finch. "She had no enemies," she said. "No?" Poirot smiled. "I believe she published a list of enemies only 3 weeks ago. It was sold in hardback for 10 shillings a copy." Clara's face flickered. It was exaggeration. But some truths lie beneath the salt. Poirot found the kitchen maid Elsie and asked if she had seen Clara at the linen cupboard. "She was on the 2nd floor," Elsie said, "but she didn't go near the linen. She went into the attic." "Why?" Elsie shrugged. "Said she heard footsteps." Poirot ascended to the attic. It smelled of mothballs and dust. But on the far end, by the narrow stained window, he found something strange, an empty medicine vial, digitalis, and in the corner, behind a stack of crates, a small metal tin. Inside, a collection of letters, love letters, to Amelia, from a woman. The initials matched. C.F. Clara Finch, Act 3, Poirot's reveal. They gathered again in the drawing room, Edward still in cuffs, the inspector bored, Margaret pacing. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, "a confession has been given, and yet it is false." Edward jolted. "I told you—" "You lied," Poirot said. "Not out of guilt, but to protect someone. He looked to Margaret. You feared it was her. He turned to Clara. But it was you. Clara blinked. You were lovers, years ago. You were dismissed, banished. But she wrote to you again, promised reconciliation, then published your letters, mocked you, named you only as the servant girl. Clara's lips quivered. You saw her laughing about it. You watched her drink the tea. You swapped the sugar cubes. I loved her, Clara whispered. She ruined me. And you ruined her in return, Poirot said. She was taken in silence. Edward was released. But the room did not feel lighter. Poirot stood alone in the rose parlour, staring at the place where Amelia had died. She confessed once, he murmured, to love, to betrayal, to bitterness. He touched the edge of the tray. Sometimes, mon ami, the confession changes nothing, because it comes too late, or from the wrong lips, or because the damage is already done. And with that, he turned and walked into the storm, leaving the house to its ghosts. Chapter 12. The one crime Poirot couldn't solve. In the final hour, even the master meets his match. The knock came at midnight. 3 gentle raps upon the polished door of room 3 at the Grand Imperial Hotel in Geneva. Polite, almost hesitant, but deliberate. Poirot rose at once. He had not slept. He hadn't expected to. A storm was sweeping across Lake Geneva, cold and wind-bound, with lightning dancing across the black water and thunder rumbling like judgment in the Alps beyond. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The porter stood in the hall, hat in hand, eyes wide. Monsieur Poirot, he said in a voice barely above a whisper, they have asked for you. It's the Villa San Rafael. There has been a tragedy. 2 hours later, Hercule Poirot stood beneath a broken chandelier, gazing down at a body sprawled across the marble floor of the villa's winter salon. The room was opulent. Gold-inlaid mirrors, velvet curtains drawn back from floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a churning lake. The body was that of Myra Velacourt, heiress, philanthropist, and known recluse. She had fallen, or perhaps been pushed, from the second-floor balcony that overlooked the room. Her neck was snapped clean. A broken glass lay beside her hand. There was no blood, no scream had been heard, just the thud, the dreadful, final sound. The household was sealed, 7 people, all inside when it happened. None had left. Poirot turned his gaze upward. The railing above was twisted, slightly. One baluster cracked, not broken, just bent. He noted the angle of the fall, the way the glass had landed, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air. Something was off. The villa's caretaker, Monsieur Duval, wrung his hands. She was alone upstairs, Monsieur Poirot. Her door was locked. No one entered, no one left. But now she is... He stopped himself. Gone. Poirot raised a single eyebrow. Alone? No one ever is, monsieur, even when they appear to be. Act 1. The crime and chaos. The suspects were familiar, but twisted in their motivations like a spiral staircase that leads nowhere. There was Dr. Emile Hartz, Myra's longtime confidant and physician, who claimed she had grown increasingly paranoid. She feared her own reflection, he said. I prescribed rest and distance. Yet, he had not left her side in 3 months. Then came Celeste Vernier, her companion. Pale, sharp-eyed, too quick to answer, and always glancing at the door. She had served Myra loyally for over a decade. Poirot noted that she referred to her mistress in the past tense long before the police declared the death official. And finally, Lucien Velacourt, Myra's estranged nephew, returned from Brazil only a week prior, the sole remaining heir after the fire that had taken his parents. He had been disinherited, then mysteriously written back into her will 2 days before she died. A will that now sat, unsigned, on her writing desk. Poirot sat in the library, letting the fire crackle, letting the room breathe. Then he closed his eyes. He could not see it. That was the beginning of the doubt. Act 2, clues, red herrings, and suspicions. He walked the house. Each step brought another contradiction. The balcony door was bolted from the inside. The keys remained in Myra's bedroom. Her diary stopped mid-sentence. Lucian knows now. It changes everything. There were no fingerprints on the railing, no signs of forced entry. And yet, a maid mentioned seeing shadows, someone passing, behind the curtains just before the body fell. But the room was empty. The wine glass held only water, but it had been set beside a bottle of sleeping draught that was missing its stopper. Poirot felt the noose of confusion tighten. Celeste claimed she had been in the kitchens, and yet a silver hairpin, her exact style, was found near the top of the stairs. Dr. Hards insisted Myra had spoken with him at 9:15, but the valet claimed he heard her phonograph playing at that very moment, too loud for conversation. Lucian said nothing, just stared at the body, unblinking. Poirot confronted him. You were her heir. You had reason. I didn't want her money. No? Poirot asked. Then why did you return? Lucian's silence said more than 1,000 denials. Poirot felt the certainty slip from him, like a page tearing down the middle. And then, just as he began to piece together a fragile solution, Dr. Hartz confessed. I pushed her, he said quietly, staring into the fire. We argued. She threatened to undo everything I had built. I lost control. Caldor, the Swiss inspector, nodded. We have our man. But Poirot did not move. He stood in the corner, frowning. It was too clean, too fast, like a play ending in Act 2, Act 3, the reveal, or what should have been. Poirot walked the villa again, alone, slowly. He stood by the broken baluster. He held the wine glass. He touched the keys, the will, the twisted railing, and still, nothing. Everything pointed to Hartz, and yet it rang false. The confession lacked weight. Poirot had heard hundreds. He knew when a man believed his own guilt. Hartz did not. He returned to Myra's room, sat by the desk, read the final diary entries again. Then, for the first time in his life, Poirot whispered to himself, I do not know. He summoned the household once more. I have always said, he began softly, that every crime is an echo, that it leaves traces of motive, of method, of the human heart. But tonight, perhaps I have met silence, the crime that does not echo, the silence that does not speak. He looked at Hartz. You confessed. Perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of fear, but I do not believe it. He turned to Lucian. You had motive and means, but you lacked the spark. To Celeste. You loved her or feared her? I do not know which. He looked down. I have always prided myself, mes amis, on the little grey cells, on order, on symmetry. But tonight, there is no symmetry, only loss. The case was closed. Hartz imprisoned. The will never signed. The estate vanished into legal dispute. Lucian disappeared once more into the fog of the world. And Poirot, for the first time in his life, wrote nothing in his journal that night, because he had failed. He stood by the lake before he departed, the storm having passed, the moon breaking through at last. Murder, he whispered, is an art of illusion. But truth, Ah, truth is the final act, and sometimes the final act never comes. He turned, walking slowly toward the station, his reflection in the water rippling apart behind him. Fading, gone.